Hello, this is Paranormal Girl. I'm now going to talk about the Brotherhood of the Snake. That fabled moment when Eve, the first mythic wife of man, a mother of all living, accepted fruit from the serpent, will remain in infamy as the first great deceit of man by the snake. Of course, despite a rich history of symbolism obtained by the lowly belly crawler amidst its ancestry on earth that predated his encounter with Adam's wife, this incident, according to the Western mind, became the very summation of the snake's establishment as a weary foe to mankind. And yet, even beyond the realm of myth, there are many who hold fast to the notion that a strange interconnection may somehow exist between man and reptile, one which could yield more, perhaps, than a mere myth association. In terms of that prevalence of the serpent-human hybridization myth and the bloodline of the serpent in human history, we can indeed depart from its primarily Christian mythos altogether, looking abroad at a variety of traditions around the world in which the lowly serpent arises and rather curiously appears as a half-human form that is suggestive of this intermingling between the species. To examine only a few examples of such serpentine representations found in world traditions, we find the sibling folk heroes of ancient China, Fuzi and Nuwa, each of whom bore snakes' tails below the waist. Fuzi is often accredited with the passing of fundamental knowledge and skills such as handwriting and food gathering, while his sister Nuwa is credited with the literal creation of mankind. In other words, these half-snake deities of Chinese folklore are both responsible for the creation and education of mankind. Thus, humanity is created and knowledge gained from those bearing close associations with the serpent. Similar traditions arise from study of ancient Greek mythology, where Cecrops, mythical first king and founder of Athens, similarly bestowed knowledge of writing and reading unto mankind. Greek mythology also featured Echidna, mother of all monsters and human snake hybrid, appearing virtually identical to the aforementioned serpent deities. And again, in Lamia, the Libyan queen and child eater, this preponderance of Greek snake people is again made evident. Moving across to the great waters of the Aztec mythology features a similar hybrid representation of the snake woman among its gods with the appearance of Chiacotl, the goddess of motherhood and fertility, whose work alongside Quetzalcoatl, who is himself often serpentine in appearance, resulted again in the creation of mankind. Both the passage of technical knowledge as well as mankind's creation remain fixtures amidst the mythos surrounding snake people in early mythologies from all over the world. Then heading northwards, the Pomo people indigenous to California have a curious legend that not only involves the consistent history relations between humans and snakes, but also specific references to interbreeding between them. Thus the story goes that a Pomo young woman was working near her family home when a rattlesnake began to observe her, watching her every move as she stopped to gather fresh clover from a field. The rattlesnake followed the girl home, and as often performed by the animal gods of Native American tradition, he transformed himself into human form, and climbing onto the roof of the girl's family home, slid down a pole located at the top of a building and entered the place. There, he began conversing with the family, announcing his intention to marry the girl he had watched earlier that day. This discourse would continue for several more nights, with the rattlesnake returning each evening in human form, where he would continue his courting of the young Pomo girl. On the fourth night, however, the snake chose to maintain his true form, entering the house and frightening the girl's mother badly as she came upon his swaying snake's head in the darkened room. The rattlesnake soon took the girl back to his home, and with time they conceived 4 boys together. These children, rather than being true human serpent hybrids, seemed to more closely resemble their serpentine father, as the legend details. They eventually began to ask their mother why she looked and acted so differently from them. But upon allowing them to examine her, she tells them something rather curious. It is impossible for you to become a human being, and though I'm not really human any longer, I must go back to my parents and tell them what has happened. This legend, first recorded in 1933 by anthropologist Samuel Barrett, never really provides a clear reason as to why exactly the human mother eventually loses her own humanity after interbreeding with the snake. Though the concept of a loss of innocence under the snake's influence somewhat resembles that of Eve's fall before the serpent in Genesis. She nonetheless returns home and explains this mystery to her parents and parts way with them, presumably to rejoin her serpent kindred once and for all. One other curious representation of the snake god in world mythologies comes of interest to us here, skipping halfway across the world to a very small municipality in northern Spain known as Betulu, in which the mythology of the Basque culture features rather prominently a character known as Sugar, often depicted as a snake or dragon. The Basque tradition here holds Sugar a consort of the greater pre-Christian Basque goddess known as Mari, and is actually a demon, and was described as being an entity who travelled through the sky between Balerdi and the Lautalda mountains, appearing as a great fireball. Aside from bearing the snake-like form, one may wonder precisely what this particular deity has to do with snake-human hybrids, let alone the pervasive notion in folklore that some historic bloodline between the two might exist. But what if there were indeed some variety of phenomenon present that, coinciding with the folklore, pointed to a real deliverance in human blood types? What would this suggest? Indeed, from this point, we will enter the realm of speculation, and in so doing, the ideas and motives that emerge become difficult to resolve. They nonetheless outline a curious parallel that exists between the culture of the serpent god and a genuine anomaly known to exist among human blood types, and one that is often considered for its potential alien connections. Indeed, it is amidst the Basque of France and Spain that we find an odd prevalence in one human blood type known as rhesus negative. The use of rhesus here denotes rhesus as the origins of the blood type, and were labelled after a common factor shared between humans and the rhesus monkey. Today, the rhesus blood group system is one of 30 of the existing current blood group systems recognised by science, by which close to 85% of humans have. The most common manifestation among the rhesus blood factor in humans is known as rhesus positive blood. By studying the common factors between the blood types, for instance humans and the rhesus monkey, it becomes clear in terms of the genetic information present here that at some point in our ancient past, humans must have shared a common ancestor with this species of old world monkeys. The rhesus negative factor is where the anomaly begins to occur, because in this instance we discover that the blood type in question differs greatly enough from the rhesus positive varieties, and that a number of conditions can occur when a mix between the two occurs. For instance, the disease known as hemolytic disease of the newborn can result in which an expecting mother is rhesus negative can suffer an allergic reaction to the presence of the fetus. If it's rhesus positive, antibodies build up in her body which can have an effect one would expect of any foreign body or virus entering one's immune system. Hence, the newborn can suffer a variety of complications or even death from heart failure in the womb. As these antibodies produced by the mother pass along to the infant through the placenta, isn't it strange that a mutation such as the rhesus negative factor is supposed by many to be could occur in such a way that it would cause a developing fetus to be treated as though it were literally alien in this way? And yet this is precisely what medical science has found to occur. Although the origins of curious rhesus negative factor remains quite a mystery. Brad Steiger, an author whose research into different varieties of strange phenomenon truly runs the gamut in terms of his interest and expertise, notes in his book Real Aliens, Space Beings and Creatures from Other Worlds that some believe this mutation occurred as a result of interbreeding between early humans and some non-human species, perhaps of alien origin. In fact, Steiger himself carries the rhesus factor and was approached by a pair of researchers, Mabel and Bonnie, at a conference who offered a variety of unique, if not somewhat odd theories on its origin, which nonetheless brings us back to the book of Genesis. Mabel and Bonnie asked the pointed question, could Basque people be the descendants of an extraterrestrial colony? Or to go even further, could Basque region have been the site of the space beings' original colony on Earth? The origin of the Basque is unknown. Their language is unlike any other European language. Some theorists maintain that Basque was the original tongue of the book of Genesis. Some believe it was the original language spoken by humankind and possibly the speech of the gods who came in ancient times. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were fair. They took them wives of all which they chose, who were the children of their marriages. In Genesis 6:4 it states, God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. They became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The passages from Genesis Steiger presents here are no doubt familiar to readers, although, however, Steiger associates then goes on to point strange parallels of the Basque people, the Old Testament, and the potential link to anomalous blood types. Mabel and Bonnie found it fascinating that the word blood is mentioned more often than any other word in the Bible except God. Those two words, they said, could be found on almost every page. Blood and God, the blood of the gods, as they pointed out. Mabel Royce said that they had searched in vain for scientific proof that rhesus negative blood was a natural earthly occurrence. Instead, she said, she had found proof that the rhesus negative type had not evolved on Earth. in the natural course of events. For many years, people have been searching for the missing link. Mabel said, could the true missing link be man himself? The unknown link between Earth and the stars? Even a hybrid man? Man may be the missing link between primate and extraterrestrial. The rhesus negative blood, which appears not to have originated on Earth, may prove to be a major factor in demonstrating that humankind is a hybrid. How likely could it be that some humans actually may have descended from an extraterrestrial bloodline? It's far easier to look into the historic and mythological interpretations of such ideas, and that it's to bolster such an argument with hard science. Nonetheless, what we see here is hard proof of some strange variety of mutation that began to emerge from humanity's murky origins. It's not difficult even for the majority of those who chose to perceive the conundrum from the Judeo-Christian perspective to surmise that common link between the two primate species had occurred along the lengthy lineage of early hominid forms, and that eventually became the modern Homo sapiens populating our planet today. But, as the rhesus negative factor seems to show, blood types exist in the modern day cannot also easily be traced back to a solitary cousin, if you will, with whom mankind shared genetic information in its ancient past. Where precisely does the rhesus negative factor stem from? And what does its continuation amidst a small minority of humans today truly reveal about what we are and where we came from? There are obvious leaps in logic that occur when we begin to assume that the answer must lay in that ever clandestine extraterrestrial potential. While we cannot rule out any possibilities, especially when facing the utter lack of evidence that constitutes the origin of a mutation like rhesus negative blood type, so to boldly assume that alien bloodline exists also has a number of problems. Much of the evidence put forth by extraterrestrial contact with mankind in ancient times seems to point towards a strange brand of intervention that occurred between our early ancestors and beings from other worlds. This may indeed be the case, but the biggest problem, assuming such, is that while we may very well have been visited at some point, we can no better prove the existence of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe by putting stock in this kind of scenario that we can do so by assuming that a scant few in our midst today are still being abducted by these beings and taken aboard flying saucers to be poked and prodded by weird, diminutive space aliens. And I beg to differ about that, because there has been a lot of evidence to suggest that we are still being visited today. Without questioning our ancient past, we can find evidence of something rather curious, as much the case with modern abductees. As with the potentials for ancient astronaut visitations, the evidence can be viewed through any given set of cultural perspectives, any ideological viewpoints, which then result in a set of vastly different interpretations as to what the evidence actually means. In other words, without concrete data to show precisely what transpired in our ancient past that led to the humans we know today, one popular interpretation that emerges amidst the questions is that we received some kind of help along the way. And yet, that same knowledge the ancient alien theorists might use to bolster such claims might be taken by the academic historian and used in an entirely different approach to understanding humanity's origins. At the end of the day, what it all boils down to is that humans don't really know where they come from. And there are a variety of options that have taken shape over the centuries, assembling tiny fragments that trickle down through the ages into a larger mosaic of mystery, and that only stems to beg greater questions as more and more pieces fall into place over time. The variety that exists among cultural interpretations of human origins gets particularly interesting once we enter the realm of popular modern conspiracy theories. For example, it's been pointed out a few times over the years that rhesus negative factor may be linked in some way to stories about reptilian aliens interbreeding with humankind. Furthermore, terms such as blue-blooded, a phrase commonly featured in esoteric terminology ranging from American patriotism to Masonic doctrine, are actually viewed by some as being reference to the literal blue-coloured blood of reptilian descendants. While this may sound very strange, the notion appears to stem from the seemingly reptilian traits that coexist with those who have rhesus negative blood. Some of these characteristics include a lower than average body temperature, lower than average blood pressure, extra vertebra that results in a sort of tail-like appendage at the base of the spine known as the cauda, hypersensitivity to light, electromagnetic fields, and a host of other strange traits. And finally, rounding out the conspiratorial perspective to its fullest extent, researcher D. Finney noted that the following, after compiling a variety of information on the alleged connection between reptilians and curious non-rhesus mutations among human blood types. The reptilians are tracking those with rhesus negative factors blood. Going back in time, the rhesus negative hybrids came from the Draco caverns in the Carpathian Mountains. They were mostly red-haired and green-eyed with black hair, with brown eyes. And they tried to infiltrate themselves into the blonde, brown-haired with blue-eyed civilization. Rhesus negatives are hybrids. They are part reptilian and part human. If two rhesus negatives try to have a baby, it will usually die or be born a blue baby because it's not processing oxygen properly. Thus, blue bloods. If they survive, 5% of the Earth's population are currently rhesus negatives. But there are 15% of the population of England and the USA. The purpose of including information of this sort alongside our study of the mythic serpent bloodline is not to help attempt making a case for the actual physical existence of the blue-blooded descendants of an alien race here on Earth. Quite the contrary. There is very little evidence to support such claims, but it is interesting nonetheless to consider the fact that our long history and fascination with the serpent does indeed seem to have its modern cultural counterparts. Though they exist along the fringes of what is considered acceptable through the modern scientific world, there is still almost an overwhelming and at times even insidious desire to believe there are aspects of our past that still elude us today, and that in order to reconcile with them, we seek to obtain knowledge from that lowly serpent, just as the scaly beast had once done in seductive fashion, as it convinced Adam's wife to grasp the coloured fruit that hung from the branch where it rested. We need to be reminded of the danger that awaited Eve in that instant, for it was the kind of danger that can only accompany the boldest truth. With it came self-realization, knowledge of things God had once deemed unfit for humankind, and aspects that cast first humans from the realms of promise and paradise. In many ways, it almost seems as though that serpent, having been cast from the garden, much like the humans here had been once deceived long ago, continues to dog us about our origins, claiming all the while to have kept away some special knowledge of who we are and how we came to be. Whether or not any definite evidence of this can be offered, of course, and despite any promise for a better future, apart from the temptation that accompanies taking another cursed bite of that damn fruit might still entail, even after all this time. How strange it would be, all things considered, if we were indeed to find that we have been kin to that most deceptive of all reptiles from the very beginning. So my question to you, do you believe reptilians exist here on this earth and are living amongst us in plain sight? Let me know your thoughts on this. I'll be very interested in to see your comments below. Thank you for watching.